Jim, thank you for agreeing to talk with me today
Sure.
about this story. Tell us, tell us about your grandfather. He's the one who started this whole thing.
Okay.
Who was he?
My grandpa Jim, James Aloysius Brennan, was born here in Washington Territory in 1873. And I only knew him up to when I was 3 years old, after which he died in 1952. And so I don't have much of a strong recollection of him,
Mm-hmm.
but I, there were family pictures, and I heard stories from my dad. And basically, Jim was a gold rusher. He'd gone up from Washington State here to the Klondike Gold Strike near Dawson, Yukon Territory, and like just about everybody else, he'd been a little bit late for that. Most of the gold was gone, so he didn't make a lot of money there. Mainly worked other people's claims. And then he went all the way downriver on the Yukon, uh, where he branched off to go to the Fairbanks strike and then the Nome strike, which was a beach mining operation, where again he was mainly mining on other people's claims. He became secretary of the miners' union, and he stayed long after most people had left because he enjoyed the lifestyle. Um, One of the things I heard from Dad was that he really liked Jim really liked the sporting life up there. There was kind of a fairness among the miners, um, and it's even though it's a rough and ready type world up there, um, he sensed a fairness that he enjoyed for his time there. So he stayed up there till 1907, and then came to Southeast Alaska. How he came to my little town where I grew up of Petersburg, I don't know. I don't know why he selected that town.
Mm-hmm.
He went to Juneau first for maybe a year, and then came to Petersburg.
So you told me that your dad never talked about or had never heard about this federal case.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he heard about it.
He had heard about it.
Oh, I'm sure he had.
How did you come to hear about it?
Well, let me just say, I'm sure he knew about it, but he never talked about it. So how I came to find it was kind of interesting. So now I'm living in Anchorage, and I have the family mahogany chest in a room in the house, and I was always short on curiosity about family history, and which I really recriminate myself for because it's pretty interesting history. But I started digging through that thing. I think I might have been going in there to look at. We had a 49-star Alaska American flag, which corresponded to the short period when Alaska was a state and Hawaii was not. And so I found this in a manila envelope, this big thick sheaf of papers, and pulled it out. What's this? And started reading from the middle of it. And I was a practicing attorney then. I'd been practicing for 10 years by that time, and I realized right away I was reading a court deposition transcript. I thought, what the hell is this? And so I turned back to page 1 to see what the name of the case was. And it was United States of America versus James Brennan. And I thought, oh, yeah, okay. Some deep, dark family history. What's going on here? I read a little more, and these are the 5 depositions that you have read and incorporated into your book. And I found out that they were part and parcel to a sedition case that had been brought in World War I, during World War I, against my grandfather, which you couldn't get more serious. It's more probably in World War I, getting charged with sedition was probably worse than getting charged with murder. I mean, it was an awful thing. So that's how I found out about it. I then spent the next 3, 4, 5 hours reading cover to cover the whole thing, and then reading the associated documents that were in there that you have seen, court documents, newspaper articles, and got the picture of what had actually happened.
Mm-hmm. So what made you years later come to me and bring me those papers to do something with them?
Well, first of all, I had toyed with the idea of writing something myself. For many years, I'd thought about that, but I'd let it go by the wayside, and frankly, it wasn't going to happen, And so I went to a talk you had given on your book, Between Two Waters, over at the Port Townsend Community Library, and I was impressed with that. And then I read the book, and I was impressed with that, the Between Two Waters book, and also your sinkhole book, and then you and I started talking, and I just gradually thought, maybe Ricardo would do a good job on this.
What were you looking for in a writer?
Well, in this case, I wanted the story to be told right. And you and I had a little back and forth here, because your métier is historical fiction. And yes, you have to create some things fictionally in order to tell a story. But in this case, we had the actual words of these, at least the witnesses, and their testimony as to what Jim Brennan said during the critical parts of it. So what I was looking for was more of sticking to the history of it. For example, and I have a thought too, well, I'm going to have family and friends in Alaska that are probably going to read this at some point. So I don't want to have it something that they look at and go, that's not right, So one thing I liked is that the first thing you did was you got out a nautical chart to see where Petersburg is situated, which is on an island in southeast Alaska, which island life kind of determines a lot of things, and determines a certain degree of isolation and also identity. So I had to help you with some of the things, but like Port Townsend, where you and I live now, also very geographically determined, its history. Petersburg's like that too. Yeah.
So not just the location, but people and situations, that some of which were in the document, some of which are the geography, but some of them were made up to create the situations, the feelings, the dialogues. What did it feel like to read things that sounded familiar but were not quite what your experience was?
It felt like, to use a word you use, plausible. Plausible. This is what they could have said. This is what they could have felt. And actually, I noticed you did not make a concerted effort to speculate on what Jim's feelings were about this. I think what his feelings are shown by his actions.
By his actions.
Yeah. Like the saying goes, judge a man by his action, not his words. And his actions here were pretty impressive.
So tell me about those 5 women, the 5 women of the depositions.
Well, you know them as well as I do, because all we've done is read deposition transcripts of them. But I share the spirit you brought in the book, which that these women were kind of heroines in their own right. They had been drug out of this town and shipped south by these federal people who had all the power in the world as far as they were concerned. And then when Jim and his attorney caught up with them in Seattle, they didn't, they were subpoenaed, yes, but they didn't have to come. They could have gotten out of it. And they came back because they did so in the interest of justice and fairness and doing the right thing. Some of their testimony is just, it kind of grabs you that, here they are sitting next to a federal prosecutor who's trying to beat him into saying something different. And I've been there. I was a practicing litigation attorney. I've seen witnesses who they don't want to say something because it goes against their company or goes against their husband or whatever. And you don't always get the truth, and often when you do get the truth, you got to read it right between the lines. So these ladies, they stepped right up and told it like it was, which is impressive.
What do you think is the meaning of that testimony of those five women now, over 100 years later?
Well, I think the meaning of their testimony, as well as the behavior of Jim, was to stand up to authority and take a stand and not be pushed around. I think it's got quite a bit of application to here and now in America, because among other things, there was also the newspaper editor who they intimidated the hell out of, hold him up for 7 hours in a catch-can hotel room to get him to change his story. And he did the best he could to hang in there and also tell the truth. So this is something we see now too, intimidation of the media. So I think, this is over 100 years ago, in 1918, this stuff went down. And some things like that, what goes around comes around every now and then, and we kind of have it in spades right now.
What do you think? You say I never tried to describe what your grandfather was feeling, just his actions.
Yeah.
But you got to know your dad, and through him, your grandfather. What do you think one of them, or both would say if they got to read this novel today?
That is a mystery to me. First of all, Dad didn't talk to me about it, or to my two older sisters. They were as shocked as I was when we read this, and it was after my father had passed away, Richard Brennan. And so, I can only speculate as to why they were quiet about it. My best guess is that Jim thought, the fact that his business, running a saloon, had a relatively cozy relationship with independently run houses of prostitution, and also just the fact that he'd been charged with sedition, even though he was not convicted. Those things could be misinterpreted in what was then a pretty straight-laced Norwegian Protestant town, and so I'm guessing that my dad, Richard, knew what his father, Jim, what his feelings, that he did not want to make it a public matter, and that he honored that. But however, he didn't bury these transcripts and these records. He put them in this chest, mahogany chest, which I think he intended for us to discover later. I think you've done a good job of telling the basic story. Oh, I was going to say that you tell the story in a different way that I would have, because partly, I was a practicing attorney and I would write motions and briefs. And so when you have told it in 5 separate chapters for these witnesses, which is no pun intended, a novel approach for me. But I would have, probably written it more like a legal brief where I describe what happens with, citations to the testimony by page and line, which would have been more boring for a novel. I mean, but I would have framed the way I would have told the story differently. And, and just I recognize that I'm not a novel writer. So I respect the fact that you are, and you've had quite a bit of experience at it.
So the novel talks about the difference between the legal writing and the fictional writing. And it even introduces another author, a Nicaraguan author,
Yes,
Sergio Ramirez, and his novel that is based on legal records.
that was interesting to me. Yeah, yeah. Well, this is a story, of course, which probably repeats itself around the world. Uh, in this case, in the case of this story of Jim Brennan, we're talking about the territory of Alaska, which it was a territory up until 1959. And so 1918 was quite early on as the state was just getting going. The town of Petersburg only had about, I think, 800 people there at that time. So it was very much a evolving situation, but I think a kind of a special world, but one where in World War I, this federal prosecutor and his Navy officer cousin, these guys were, the boys from Ketchikan were kind of a big deal. Well, one thing I was going to say was that, they were in Ketchikan, and they ordered this 110-foot subchaser to come north to the little town of Petersburg to do what? It couldn't have been just to bust a still or to close a red light district. They really, and then he also had another subchaser from Juneau, another 110 footer, come down, and they were both in town at the same time. It must have been quite something to behold for the Petersburgites. And I think they probably were there for squelching pro-Germanic behavior in World War I, which was a total myth as far as Petersburg was concerned. They were pretty as patriotic as anybody else, maybe more so, but they had the odd circumstances of many of these families. It's a Norwegian town. They had just come over from Norway not too long ago, and now they were raising their kids. Their sons were coming of age, and next thing that happens is they're going to possibly be drafted to go into the army and fight in the trenches of France, which is that whole European warfare thing was part of what these Norwegian fishermen had come over here to get away from.
What they were getting away from.
Yeah, so a lot of them, they were telling their sons, don't do it. And so that was interpreted in places like Juneau as pro-Germanic behavior.
And so bringing two subchasers was an act of force and an intimidation.
I have to think that was the biggest motivator. Why would you bring all that to? I mean, it was kind of amazing to me that the Navy would have two vessels of like that hanging around in Alaska. I mean, it wasn't like the Kaiser was about to invade Southeast Alaska. So, it's one of those things I'd actually like to know more about that aspect of it. Yeah.
Well, Jim, thank you very much for this conversation.
You bet.
And thank you for sharing this story with me that made for this.
Thank you for writing it.
A very good novel.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
All right.